On the 7th anniversary of our relationship, I carefully selected a cake from Cheesecake Factory, hoping to make the day memorable. Just as I set it down to celebrate, a strange girl approached, her wide eyes fixed on the cake, saying she wanted a piece too. I hesitated, uncertain, but eventually reached for the knife to cut her a slice. Before I could, she suddenly pulled out a lighter and ignited the hydrogen balloon hanging closest to me. The balloon burst instantly, flames roaring dangerously near my face. When the fire subsided, the scene that met my eyes left me frozen. My boyfriend, Charles Cattle, was holding the strange girl tightly in his arms, shielding her as if she were the one in danger. As I stood rooted in disbelief, he rushed to explain, his words tumbling over each other. Don't misunderstand. She's my sister. She was just joking around. That's all. The girl, Dorothea Cattle, let out a pitiful wail, tears streaming down her face. Sis-in-law is so mean. It's just a silly cake. Then, as if her tantrum wasn't enough, she shoved the table with such force that the cake I had spent hours preparing shattered into pieces on the floor. I stood motionless, my gaze locked on the crooked number 7 lying amidst the wreckage. On the floor, the candles hadn't even been lit, let alone blown out. A bitter thought clawed its way into my mind. Maybe this was the sign I needed. Maybe it was time to let go. Charles stepped toward me, his expression briefly flickering with pity. He reached for my sleeve, his voice soft, almost coaxing. Don't be upset. It's just a cake. I'll get you another one. He hesitated before adding, Dorothea is just childish. She's been spoiled since she was little, but she doesn't mean any harm. She's always wanted to meet you, he continued, his tone overly indulgent. When she found out it was our anniversary, she probably thought it'd be funny to play a harmless joke. I stared at him in disbelief, tightening my chest. How could he be so blind, so blatantly biased, as if her actions weren't a deliberate slap in the face? Tears burned in my eyes as anger surged through me. I snapped back, my voice laced with disbelief. Childish? Then she must be aging terribly, don't you think? What is she? 3 years old this year. Huh. More like 31. My words came sharper now, cutting through his weak defense. And even if she were 3, even toddlers know better than to play with fire. Don't tell me she was joking. She lit that balloon on purpose. Charles pinched the bridge of his nose, his frustration evident. His voice carried the weight of impatience as he replied, Isabella, can you stop making such a big deal over something so trivial? Besides, if you hadn't insisted on decorating with balloons, Dorothea wouldn't have had anything to light. In the first place, honestly, I didn't even want to celebrate this anniversary. 7 years together. Do we really need all the ceremony? I froze, his words slicing through me like a cold wind. My heart ached, the pain sharp and suffocating. Little things, I repeated, my voice trembling with disbelief. Do you have any idea how close those flames came to my face? How close they were to my eyes? My voice rose with each word, my chest tightening with the weight of betrayal. I could have been disfigured, blinded. Do you understand that? And you call this a little thing? Charles, I'm your girlfriend. 7 years, and this is what I mean to you. Is my safety so meaningless to you? This time, Charles said nothing. His silence spoke louder than any excuse he could muster, but his expression darkened, irritation flickering in his eyes. The tension between us thickened, but before I could speak, Dorothea suddenly burst into loud theatrical sobs, her cries echoing across the restaurant. Rubbing her eyes dramatically, she wailed like a child seeking sympathy. Sis-in-law, I know I was wrong. Please don't argue with my brother anymore. I promise I'll never eat cake again. Heads turned, and whispers rippled through the room, like wildfire. The sight of the ruined cake on the floor seemed to spark judgment in every glance cast my way. What kind of sister-in-law makes such a fuss over a cake? One woman muttered, her disapproval unmistakable. Exactly. Someone else chimed in. Poor girl probably didn't mean it. So petty to cause such a scene. Another voice cut through, sharper than the rest. Women like that shouldn't be married. She'll only bring trouble to her household. Each comment felt like a slap, their words sinking into my chest like stones. The weight of their stares made the air thick, almost suffocating. In an instant, I became the center of everyone's disdain, their judgmental whispers slicing through me like knives. Yet, Charles stood firmly by Dorothea's side, his hand gently patting her back as if shielding her from the cruelty of the world. He didn't even glance my way. I stood there, rooted in place, the ache in my chest spreading like wildfire until it stole the very breath from my lungs. My heart felt as though it were cracking, piece by fragile piece. The man tenderly comforting another woman. How could he be the same man I had loved, trusted, and built a life with for 7 years? Perhaps this was fate's cruel design from the start. I still remember the first time I met Charles. It was at a funeral home. I had just lost my father. He had just lost his mother. While I wept quietly in a shadowed corner, drowning in grief, he approached me with quiet footsteps. Without saying a word, he extended a handkerchief, offering me comfort I hadn't even known I needed. His lips were thin, pressed into a firm line as if he were holding back unspoken thoughts. The soft glow of sunlight streamed through the window, casting gentle highlights on his face. Here, wipe your tears, he said, his voice calm. The departed have already moved on. If they could see you now, they wouldn't want you drowning in sadness. I took the handkerchief he offered without hesitation, using it to dab my tears and embarrassingly, to blow my nose. Realizing what I'd just done, I froze, glancing at him in awkward embarrassment. The corners of his lips twitched ever so slightly as if a smile was just about to surface when suddenly, a loud wail shattered the fragile quiet of the room. His expression shifted in an instant, his attention drawn elsewhere. Without a word, he turned and hurried away, disappearing into the hall without even leaving his name. The next time I saw him, it was on the bustling first day of university. I had been walking past the sports field, soaking in the excitement, when a basketball came hurtling out of nowhere and smacked me squarely on the head. Everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was lying in the infirmary. The doctor shot him a teasing look and gestured in his direction. He's the one who brought you in, all flustered and in a panic, insisting I give you a thorough checkup, the doctor said, his tone lighthearted. I thought it was something serious, but it turns out you just needed some food. Low blood sugar, that's all. Good thing you're awake now. If you'd stayed out much longer, I think this young man might have shed a few tears. Embarrassment heated my cheeks as I bowed my head and muttered a quick thank you. He didn't reply. Puzzled, I glanced up and froze when our eyes met. His gaze held a familiar shyness, his expression tentative. "It's you," I blurted in surprise. His ears flushed a deep crimson, and he mumbled, barely louder than a whisper, "Yes." Later, I came to know his name and his story, and eventually, his hand in mine became a constant. That hand-holding stretched into 7 long years. I had always known he was an orphan, adopted by a couple who later had a daughter of their own. After his adoptive parents passed away, Dorothea became the only family he had left in the world. I understood that being abandoned as a child left him with wounds he tried to hide, scars that made the idea of building a family feel like a fragile dream. And so, I waited. Year after year, I waited for him to find his way to me. 7 years slipped by, yet not once did he mention marriage. Every time I tried to bring it up, he would evade the topic, skillfully steering the conversation elsewhere. I convinced myself it was just a matter of time. But what I hadn't seen, what I had foolishly ignored, was the presence of another woman standing between us all along. It was always her. She could summon him with a single phone call, claiming to be unwell, even if I had traveled miles just to see him. On my birthday, I spent hours getting ready, imagining a perfect evening together. I had set the scene dressed in my best, my heart brimming with hope. But then, a message from her arrived, a flimsy excuse about being scared of the dark during a power outage. And just like that, he left me behind, pulling on his jacket without so much as a glance back. Through every bitter moment of disappointment, I clung to one thought. She's his sister. Blood ties or not, she's still the bond his adoptive parents left him. She's his responsibility. But now, as I stood there watching them, her leaning into him, his arms around her protectively, a realization hit me like a bolt of lightning. Dorothea's face, her delicate features, bore an uncanny resemblance to mine. 7 points of similarity, clear as day. I could no longer fool myself. With a bitter smile, I whispered the words that had been building up inside me for so long. "Charles, let's break up." The moment the words left my mouth, I turned on my heel, leaving without a single glance back. As I walked, my vision blurred with tears, the world around me dimming like a fading dream. The neon lights flickered. In the distance, barely visible through the haze of my grief, I felt like I was drifting, aimless, and lost. Then, suddenly, a scooter rushed toward me from the right, its horn blaring in a frantic warning. My legs turned to stone, frozen in place as I watched the headlights grow larger, the sound of the horn cutting through the air like a knife. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Just then, a strong hand gripped mine, yanking me backward with force. I stumbled, my feet tripping over each other, but I was pulled out of harm's way just as the scooter whizzed past, grazing me. Breathing heavily, my heart racing, I turned to see the last person I expected to find, Dorothea, standing there with a smug smile playing on her lips. Well, sister-in-law," she began, her voice dripping with sweet malice. "Oh, wait, you just broke up with my brother, didn't you?" Her head tilted slightly, her expression one of feigned innocence. Gone was the fragile, frightened girl I had seen earlier. Now, all that remained was a mask of smug satisfaction. "Sister Isabella, you seem quite uncomfortable with my presence," she said, her voice laced with mockery. "Why is that?" Her eyebrows arched teasingly, and she added, "But I have to hand it to you. Your luck is something else. That fire. It came dangerously close to ruining that pretty face of yours." Her gaze turned cold as she tightened her grip on my hand, leaning in with a smug smile. "This face, the one that bears a striking resemblance to mine." I gritted my teeth and wrenched my hand free, my voice sharp. "So, you did it on purpose. You set that fire on purpose. Do you realize I could report you to the police for this?" She crossed her arms and laughed derisively, her voice dripping with disdain. "Go ahead. Reporting me will only push my brother further away from you. Huh. Consider today a little lesson," she sneered, her words biting. "Let me make one thing clear. My brother is mine. As long as I'm here, you'll never take him from me, not even in marriage." I met her gaze, unflinching, and instead of getting angry, I chuckled softly. Her expression darkened with annoyance. "What's so funny? Do you think I'm bluffing?" With a calm smile, I met her gaze and replied, "I'm laughing at you. I'm laughing at how naive you are. Yes, with a sister like you, it's true. Charles might never marry anyone," I said with a knowing grin, "but he's definitely never going to marry you." Dorothea's face turned ashen as though my words had struck her at her core. I smiled faintly, pressing on. "And do you know why? Because it's forbidden. It's incest. You." Fury flashed in Dorothea's eyes as she raised her hand to slap me, but I caught her wrist midair, my gaze sharp and unwavering. "Dorothea, for 7 years, I've been a fool," I said coldly, my words cutting through the air. "I no longer care about Charles. But as for you, setting that fire to harm me, this isn't over." I released her wrist, my hand moving to pull out my phone, ready to call the police. She glared at me, her face hard with defiance, but in an instant, her expression shifted. Before I could even react, she grabbed my hand and shoved it against her chest. Then, with an exaggerated motion, she fell backward, landing on the ground with a dramatic wail. "Sister," she sobbed, her voice trembling with feigned accusation. "I just wanted to stop you from breaking up with my brother. Why did you push me so hard?" Frozen in shock, I stood motionless, trying to process what had just happened. "I didn't push." But before I could finish, Charles' frantic voice rang out behind me. "Dorothea." He suddenly lunged at me, shoving me to the ground in his frantic rush to reach Dorothea. Still balancing on my high heels, I stumbled, and a sharp twist of my ankle sent a jolt of pain through me. A cry escaped my lips, but Charles seemed to hear nothing at all. He knelt in front of Dorothea, his face contorted with worry as he examined her from head to toe. "Are you okay, Dorothea? Where does it hurt? Is it bad?" At that moment, it felt as though the entire world had turned its back on me. A bitter laugh bubbled from my throat as I let out a sigh, resigned to the bitter reality. I pulled out my phone to call a car, but before I could dial, Charles stepped forward, his hand knocking the phone from my grasp. With a cold, expressionless face, he commanded commanded, Isabella, apologize to Dorothea. My phone landed nearby with a crack, its screen shattering. A wave of bitterness flooded through me, stinging my throat. I struggled to hold back the tears, my voice steady despite the hurt. I didn't push her, but Charles simply stared, disbelief etched across his face. I locked eyes with him for a moment, my fists clenched tight, but the frustration and grief I'd buried deep inside surged to the surface. Tears flowed down my cheeks in a relentless stream as though the floodgates of my heart had finally given way. I cried with such intensity, my breath coming in jagged gasps, that I could scarcely find air. Charles froze for a moment, his face shifting as a flicker of guilt crossed his features. Tentatively, he reached out, his voice laced with uncertainty. I'm sorry, Isabella, but before he could finish, Dorothea suddenly appeared in front of me, throwing herself to the ground. She knelt there, her head bowed and her sobs rising in a frenzied rhythm. I'm sorry, Sister Isabella. It's all my fault. I shouldn't have intruded on your time with my brother. I'm sorry. I swear I won't show up in front of you again. Please. Don't be angry anymore. Charles stood frozen for a moment, his gaze snapping to the bloody scrape on Dorothea's leg. His face shifted to one of alarm as he quickly pulled her up. He pointed at the wound, his voice full of fury. Did you do this? Do you have any idea what this means? Dorothea's legs are her life. One injury could ruin her balance. Watching him defend her like that, my chest tightened, and a bitter laugh slipped from my lips. Sarcasm dripped from my words as I sneered. Yes, it was me. I just can't stand her clinging to you. I wanted to ruin her, so what? But before I could finish, the sharp sting of a slap cut through the air. The burn on my cheek was instant, the heat spreading quickly as my skin swelled beneath the impact. It wasn't until the cold wind hit the wound, sending a violent shiver through me, that it truly hit me. Charles had struck me, the same Charles who, for 7 long years, wouldn't let me lift a finger in the kitchen or wash a single dish. The same one who had insisted on warming my feet before he'd even sleep in the coldest winters had slapped me, all for another woman. Charles stood frozen, staring blankly at his own hand as if in disbelief at what he had just done. But the frown on his face deepened as he muttered, Isabella, how did you become like this? I met his gaze, my heart heavy with the weight of disappointment and anger, turning my gaze to Dorothea beside him, her eyes gleaming with a mix of smugness and challenge. I couldn't help but lower my head. A hollow laugh escaped me. I'm such a fool. I wiped away my tears, the bitter laugh still hanging in the air. To think I wasted 7 years on someone like you. Charles froze, his body going rigid as my words hit him. I chuckled bitterly at myself as I stood, but the moment I tried to put weight on my injured ankle, pain shot through me. I faltered, nearly toppling over, but someone reached out just in time to steady me. Ignoring Charles's hand, half extended in hesitation, I focused solely on the person who had caught me. A man with a strikingly handsome, refined face appeared. Out of nowhere, his gaze swept briefly over Charles and Dorothea before landing on me with a knowing look. A sly smile curled on his lips, and he winked at me playfully, his voice dropping low, just for my ears. Sweetheart, didn't we agree you'd come to my place tonight? I've been waiting for you forever. Why are you out here wasting time with these bystanders? I've missed you so much, and that's where we'll leave the story for now. The journey ahead is full of twists, turns, and unforgettable moments. You won't want to miss. Keep reading and uncover what happens next. Download the Novel Short app and search for 343,780 to continue the adventure. Thank you for joining me, and I can't wait to see you in the next chapter.